Hello, it's Pastor Marleen once again, returning with our Bible study on Exodus. And last we left off at the end of chapter 17, and we're going to cover chapter Exodus 18 and 19 during this episode. In chapter 18, you suddenly find that Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, is coming back. We hadn't heard anything about him. We also didn't catch exactly what happened to Moses' wife in the interim, but apparently Moses' wife, Zipporah, has been with her father, and he brings her back and their two sons back so that they can be reunited with Moses, because Moses has heard that God has delivered the people. So word's gotten out that the Egyptian forces, I don't want to say overtaken, but they were overtaken by the Red Sea, but certainly not by the Israelites themselves. But that the Israelites are now free, that they're able to move on. So there we go. We're out in the wilderness. Jethro comes to meet them, and if you look again, if you do find a map and you can find where Jethro is from, you'll see that Moses traveled out pretty far before finding living with Jethro and becoming married before he went back into Egypt. And by pretty far, I mean a few days, not long distances, and certainly by today's standards, not long at all. But it's not like it was the village next door either. I mean, it was definitely out. So they greet each other, and there's rejoicing. And not only is there rejoicing, but Jethro, who is a priest in Midian, is actually starting to understand who God is. Now, we don't get kind of a full conversion of Jethro saying, I am following the Lord your God, but he acknowledges God's power, so much so that he even offers burnt offerings and sacrifices to God. And so Jethro comes to the point of worshiping God. I don't know that he ever comes to the point of saying, this is the only God, this is who I'm going to worship, forever. But that's a significant piece that I don't want you to miss as you read through the chapter. And then you also get a sense of how much Moses respects his father-in-law and how much wisdom Jethro has. Because that's when we have this story of Moses just being overwhelmed by the people's needs. Every time the people grumble, every time the people are unhappy, they go to Moses. They're unhappy with God, they go to Moses. They're unhappy with their neighbor now because now they've been camping out for a little bit and the neighbors are annoying them. Somebody has a dispute over whose property is whose. Somebody gets into a fight. Whatever they're arguing about, Moses hears it. And Jethro says, you can't keep doing that. This is crazy. You're wearing yourself out. You need to find good men. You need to train them up. You need to make sure everybody knows the laws and the rules and how to live. And then you need some people to oversee other people, because you can't be hearing everybody's complaints. And Jethro's wisdom is wonderful. It sets us up so that the Israelites kind of have a sense of governance, where there are people that Moses trains and pulls out, and they listen to all the minor offenses, and there's only things that they can't decide on that they bring before Moses. It's a good system. I've often heard it used for churches as well, to try to encourage people to delegate. But that is a good reason to delegate. We should delegate, and especially clergy of smaller churches are terrible at that. And I can say that from personal experience. But we do have lots of strong leaders that are able to do things, and we need to make sure they get that as opportunities. But it's not just applicable to the church and how we function, making sure we're not burning ourselves out, but it's certainly a good model for governments and other communities that are gathering, because you need to realize that they're not talking just about the spiritual life. They're talking about all the everyday things that are happening in these people's lives. And Moses finally gets some break, and then his father-in-law does depart. But his father-in-law departs knowing that Moses is stronger now, knowing that Moses has things underhand, and knowing that his own daughter, uh, Jethro's daughter, is safe and in a place where it will be okay. So he leaves to his own land. And then we have a little bit more movement once again because we're moving uh, to the Mount of Sinai, and we're preparing for God to give us this word, the Torah, the commandments, the Decalogue. You know, all those terms get used for what most of us would just call the Ten Commandments. But chapter 19 is really preparing for Moses to go up and receive these commandments, and for the people to know the presence of God in their midst. But there's some things that they need to realize. They need to realize the power of God. So they're not, they're told that they can't go too close to that mountain. God's going to be right there, and you can't be touching the mountain. You need to keep a distance from the mountain. And so there's a cloud over it, and there are all those miraculous signs that just let you know that a theophany, which means an appearance of God, God being made known in our midst, is about to happen. So you have the thunder and the lightning and the cloud wrapping around the mountain and smoke coming. And you can just imagine it being loud and awesome in the sense of, not how we use awesome, like everything's so awesome, but awesome in the sense that it is awe inspiring. It is making us realize how powerful God really is. So you get that whole image and this whole warning, and you are all set up. You're even consecrating the people, the priest and Moses himself, so that they will go close to where God is, and they're waiting on God's word and God's presence fully with them. This was the whole point of leaving Egypt, that they would be able to worship God, and not only worship God, but that God would be in their midst. Now, ideally, we realize that God is in our midst every time we worship, whether we're at home praying ourselves, that we would know Christ is present with us, whether two or three are gathered at a committee meeting for church or around a supper table, remembering that they're being fed by God, not by their own works. Or whether we're gathered on worship on Sunday morning. Ideally, we know the presence of God, and we do have that sense of awe. I mean, that's why our churches have artwork in them. That's why our churches are built in the architectural style that they're building. And I know that there's contemporary churches that aren't built to look like a church with a tall steeple and those kind of things. But there's still many in our communities, and many of you worship at a place that can be awe-inspiring. And I hope that when you're there, you have that sense of awe. It's not going to compare with Mount Sinai, but it does remind us that there is something different when we remember that God truly is present with us. And that's the preparation that they're making in chapter 19. And may you know God's presence in your own life. Thanks for joining again.